Do you want to learn how to rewind time? Well, then look no further, because this is the video to learn how to do so. I put up a little demo video a couple days ago showing this technique, and a lot of people really wanted to learn how. So if you're interested, stick around, because we'll be making exactly this. First things first, obviously we're going to need a puppet. So what we want to do is we want to remember where we've been, and when we decide to rewind time, we can then traverse back through the path that we took to get back to where we started. So I'll get a microchip out here, and I'll call this Create Memories. And within this microchip, I'll get out a timer, and I will get out an emitter, and that's all we're going to need. The timer will loop on itself, and every time it's done, it will emit something. I'll set this to something shorter, and there we go. Now we just have to have something to emit. So I'll get out just a random small little object here, and I will make this object not collidable, and in the future we'll make it not visible, but for now I'll leave it. And on this cube, I'll have this microchip. And so this microchip, or this whole object, is essentially one of our memories, right? So if I have an emitter here, and I'll set it to once, and I'll set that to 5. Now if I choose to emit this object, I want to emit it at the feet of our puppet, like so. There we go. We can see now that as we play and run around, we're creating a path behind us. Now the oldest one gets deleted once we reach the max emitted, but I think that's fine. And so we can use this object to store a tag which stores a location. I've labeled it step because it's kind of where we've been, I suppose. And I'll put it at the bottom center of the cube, so that way when it gets emitted, it's right in between the feet of the puppet. Now when we go to rewind, we're going to use the location of the tag to move our puppet. And so we have to be able to move backwards through all of the tags that we have. Now since there are 5 at a time, or there are up to 5 available as of right now with our settings, then we need to know which one is the newest one, and we want to go to that tag. So in order to do that, I will use an exclusive gate so that only one tag is on at a time. One of these step tags is on at a time. And I'll get out a timer, which will turn the exclusive gate on. And I'm going to switch this timer to countdown mode and set the max, or the target time, to the max, and I will also set the current time to the max. And so we can use the current time to override our priority on this gate. And so what that does is, over time, its priority falls. And so if this were available and then a new one was created somewhere else, that one would be the newest one, and it would have the higher priority, and so this tag would turn off. You can see this if I make a copy of this cube and use the copy to emit. We can see this tag is on, but if I start time, once the next cube gets emitted at his feet, this tag will turn off because it no longer has the higher priority. So at some point we're going to need to be able to destroy this memory, and we can use something like a trigger zone to detect if the player is within it. So I'll set this to a tag. So I have this tag called player feet, which is attached to the character. I'm going to set the grid origin to the puppet and move the tag so that it's between the feet and it's oriented in the way that the puppet is oriented. So in this trigger zone, we will detect the player feet tag, And so maybe I'll just change it to a circle and I'll make it kind of small like that. Okay, so we're going to need to use this to destroy the cube when we start rewinding. And so since we only want this to happen while we're rewinding, we will actually need another condition here. We'll get out an AND gate, and this will power the destroyer. And we will use a wireless transmitter to be the other source of power, and this wireless transmitter I will label rewinding. So this will be an indicator that we are currently rewinding, so that when we are rewinding and our player's feet come in contact with this zone, this will delete itself. So with this, we can now start working on our rewind mechanic. So this rewind mechanic will have some sort of trigger coming in from our controller sensor. So for that, I'll get out a node and we can wire up a button. For now, I'll just use triangle. So first things first, while we are rewinding, we're going to want to turn this create memories chip off. And so this will disable the memory emission. And so when we tap a button, we're going to want to turn this on, but we want it to turn on while we're rewinding. So I'll get out a timer and I will plug this input from here. And so we want to turn this on when this thing is running and obviously before it finishes. So I will rewind the end back into the reset timer so that when it's done, it won't be playing. And I will get out a calculator and set this to greater than 0. And what we want to detect is this current time is greater than 0. And so if that's true, then we can turn on this chip. So if I set this controller sensor to remote controllable and I start time, I can press triangle and we can see that this will stay on for the duration of this timer. Now the reason I didn't use the timer output on this keyframe is because this timer output can be any value between 0 and 1, and it's only 1 when the current time reaches, well actually when the current time passes 1. So everywhere from 0 to 1 second will slowly increase the power. You can see it fades in there, and that's not what we want. We want it to just be on. And so obviously we want to do more than just disable the memory emission. So I'm going to get out another microchip and we can organize things, everything that we want to do while we're rewinding inside of this microchip. So this will turn this microchip on. So one thing we definitely want to do is we want to follow our tag, the step tag, and remember there's only one at a time. And so I will put that there, and we want to set this gizmo here to the feet area, because if we place a tag in the air by jumping, we want our feet to reach that point, not some other point. So I put the follower down here, and to make this look smooth, I note the run speed here, which is at 6 meters per second. And so as long as our follower speed is somewhere between our walk speed and our run speed, we can set it somewhere in there. So 5.5 will work just fine, but we can also set it to 6. Now if you do it too fast, then it'll look weird, and if you do it too slow, then the rewind will take a long time. Now you remember we have this rewinding wireless transmitter inside of our memory thing, so we will need to also send a signal to that to let all of our memories know that we're rewinding. So I'll get a wireless receiver out, and this will communicate with rewinding, and I'll set it to scene wide. and we can just get a switch out, make sure that it's on, and plug that in. So you can see that even though this switch is on, the microchip is off, so our signal is not active. But if I press triangle, it turns that on, and we can see that the wire turned on. So now that we've placed the object back into the emitter, we can go into test mode, or play mode, and see how this looks. We can run around, and it's generating a path behind us. And now when I press triangle, the player walks towards each of the blocks. Now I'm stuck here until that timer is done, so we need a way to turn that off. And also, if you notice, the player walks forward sometimes towards the next thing, so we need to be able to change that as well. So inside of this microchip, I will get out a rocket rotator, and what a rocket rotator does is it makes things aim in the direction that they're traveling, assuming that this is pointed in the direction of travel. So if this was pointed ahead of us, then our character or any object will aim in that general direction. So if I take this rocket rotator and point it backwards and set the strength and the damping up, now we can see how this looks with the rocket rotator on. We can see when I press the triangle button, it constantly faces its back towards the next tag instead of trying to turn and face the front. So that's what kind of gives us our illusion of moving backwards. The only other thing we have to take care of is making sure that when we're finished rewinding, this timer gets reset. So we can do that with a trigger zone. And I'll have this trigger zone detect the step tag, and I'll make it scene wide. And so only one is on at a time, but that means our number detected will either be a 1 or a 0. So we could take the number detected and compare it against 0, and if that's true, then perhaps our rewind is done, because as you remember, as we rewind back, more and more tags get deleted, and because the memory emission is off, once we've completely finished going over all of them, there should be no more tags. Now, I just want to point something out here. If I use a number displayer on the number detected, the number will only ever be at 1 because only one tag is on at a time. And while it's deleting, you can see it flashes very quickly to 0. So in order to make sure that we're completely finished, there are a couple things we can do. If you were very set on the number of emitted memories at a time, then you could just use a counter set to that. Set to, like for example, this would be 5. So every time this detects something, we can increase the counter, and when it's full, that means we're done. Or, since it's a very quick and brief flashing of 0, we can just get a timer out and set it to something very small, like 0.1 seconds, which would be 3 frames. And when this is true, when it is 0, we'll start the timer. And when it's not 0, meaning it becomes 1, then we'll reset the timer. And so if this ever gets finished, then we can send a pulse to the timer to reset it, which would turn all of this off. Now the reason this works is because the other tag only takes one more frame to turn on when the first one is deleted. So our character goes into the range of the trigger zone inside of the memory. It deletes itself, and when that happens, in the next frame, the next tag turns on because the exclusive gate within it. So this will never reach 3 frames of time unless there are actually no more trigger zones. So now we can run around, or not no more trigger zones, but no more tags. So when we run around, I can press triangle. We can see it rewinds us to the back, and here we've been let go of the rewinding because we reached the point in time where there were no more tags. So now with this setup, what we have is once we start rewinding, this timer will start, and this target time doesn't matter too much. All we want to do is make sure that this target time here is longer than it will take for the character to go back through all of the tags. So if this timer was too short, say it was only a second, then what would happen here is when we go to rewind, it'll try to rewind over them, but after 1 second it stops and gives up. So since we want to make sure that this timer basically runs long enough for us to rewind over everything, instead of using this target time as a set amount, you can get a calculator out, and if we take the current time and add something to it, like 1, we can plug the output of that calculator into the target time. And so this way the timer will basically run indefinitely, and the only thing that will ever reset it will be when we've deleted all of our tags. And so this way it's a little bit more customizable in how many tags you want to be able to place on the floor. So if we turned up the emitter output, we can maybe set this to like 25, for example. Then we'd be able to have a much longer trail to follow, or more time to rewind through. Now, it's worth noting that there is some sort of limitation here because our object that we're emitting has a trigger zone on it. And you can only have so many trigger zones within a scene. This is a pretty small one, so it probably takes up not as much thermo as bigger ones. But regardless, there are only so many of these we can have. So I wouldn't set this to unlimited with this method, because at some point there would be some sort of limit that you would reach and things may not work the way you want them to. But we can see that you can have a decent number of these down, and they will continue to work. And so if you want to have longer or shorter paths, that's completely up to you and what you're trying to do. So to make it look good, I'll get a timeline out, and we can play with some settings. First of all, we're going to need some sounds, so I'll grab some. So I'll get this light switch sound out. We can hear how this sounds. Oops. So we can use this as a tick to sound like a clock. So I'll just get rid of a couple of them. So we just have this one sound. And I will set this to repeat. And all we have to do is make sure that this is long enough. I'll get out a couple more sounds here. Get out this sub-bass dive, which sounds like this. There's also this electric coil spin up. So I can also get out this calm fire sound. There's this whooshes section, which is really nice. This long airy whoosh as well. Alright, so now we have the sounds, which I think sound pretty good. So now we can affect how things look visually. I'll get out a grade and effects gadget, and what this gadget can do is affect a lot of how things look on the screen. Here, if I bring it out of the timeline, I can take a better look. So we can change the brightness, we can affect the saturation. one thing that's really nice is we can affect the bloom, wherever the bloom is. So we can turn bloom all the way up. And so one thing we need to note is that because we're limited on how many things we can emit at once to 5, we don't need this timeline to be too long, and we kind of want to be a little bit aware of how long the maximum rewind would be. So in order to try and figure out the max runtime here, I will stretch this out further. Okay. Now, our player has a max speed, right? A max run speed of 6 meters per second. So if I run forward at the max speed and I make sure that 5 are emitted, that would be the maximum time it would take for us to rewind. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now I press the rewind button. And so that's the longest it would take. So if we pin this to the screen, we can go into test mode and see just about where things stop. So I will run max speed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so we see it got just a little bit over 4 seconds there. And so now what we'll do is we'll keyframe some things to make the gradient and effects look better. So one thing I for sure want to do is I want to turn the bloom all the way up, because that kind of gives a sort of magical look, and we want it to be very clear that there's something going on that, you know, is magical. Just to have it do a little bit of ramp in, I will make the keyframe a little bit bigger here, and I will fade it in. So now we can see how this would look if I pressed play on the timeline, if the play button would show itself. There we go. So we can see the bloom slowly comes into full effect. And I'll get another keyframe here, and that won't affect anything. That'll just be empty, and we'll blend between the two. So if we play, we can see the bloom starts off at 100% and slowly decreases down. So now I'll get another keyframe out, and this one will be blank, but I want to affect the brightness. So I will turn the brightness. First of all, I'm going to turn it all the way up just for a little bit. Right? And so if we blend between the two, we can bring this in. And now this one, we'll bring it down somewhat because we don't want to blind everybody. Now we can blend between these two. I can also turn keep changes off now. And we'll bring this down again to like 50. Okay, and now, oops. And now the next one, which will be just a little bit before 4 seconds, this will be a blank keyframe, and that will bring the brightness back down to the original 0%. So now we can see how it looks, and it slowly fades out in the visual aspect. Just realize these are 3D, which may be desirable, but for now I don't want them to be. I want to be able to hear it no matter where I am for testing reasons, so I'll play it. So now we can see how this looks. Right, and there we have it. That's the mechanic that I made for that little demo video. So let's say you wanted, instead of just pressing the button and rewinding all the way, say you wanted to be able to hold the button and let go when you want. We can do that. It's just going to take a little bit of a change here. First of all, in our emitter, we will need something to let us know that it needs to be destroyed. Right? Because if we only rewind over half of our thing, we don't necessarily want to keep the older memories from before they stopped rewinding, right? So we'll get out a I'll just copy this over and I'll change the name of this. And so it's called done rewinding, and so if we ever receive a signal from there, it'll just kill all of the memory that's sitting around on the floor. So all we need to do here to get that to activate is send a signal to Send a signal to this wireless receiver here. I don't know why it does that sometimes. It like loses what the chip is. Alright, so this will talk to done rewinding. And so now, since we are no longer just turning it on and letting it run, the things here will be a little bit different, right? We can get rid of this timer because we no longer need to make sure that they're all gone, right? So we'll get rid of all of this stuff. And we can even get rid of this as well. And so now all we have to do is we'll get out a signal manipulator, and the input will go into the signal manipulator, and in this custom remapper we will pulse when it's off. Okay, so it'll start, and if I set this controller sensor to remote controllable, you can see if I hold triangle it's on, and when I let go it sends a pulse. So we'll use that to reset our timer and also send a signal to done rewinding saying that it is done rewinding, and I'll make sure to set that to scene. So now we can see if I hold triangle but let go, it stops, right? And so this changed how our timeline works, so we just have to fix that real quick. This signal will also just rewind the timeline, and we can see how this works. So we're putting out a path, and if I rewind and I decide I'm done there, I'll just end it. There's a little bit of momentum from the following, right? So if I stop here and then let go, you can see it keeps walking a little bit. And while that may be necessary in the air, we don't really want, I think that kind of looks a little lame if I just stop there and it keeps going back. If something feels a little unpolished about that. So in order to make that look a little bit more polished, I will get a mover out, and this pulse will briefly turn the mover on, and we'll set it to 0 meters per second, meaning it should stop, and make sure the damping is up all the way. And so what this will do is very briefly send a signal to this mover, which will stop the puppet in place. Doesn't really matter which way the gizmo is pointing. And so now if I hold and let go at any point, he'll stop running and he won't carry his momentum with him, right? And so even if I stop midair, let me try and get a block here in the air. Even if I stop midair, he'll stop there, right? The block staying there in the air isn't necessarily problematic. Wait, how do I get that? There we go. If I stop here, okay, well, it doesn't always happen, I suppose. But even if you saw if I have a block in the air like that, it doesn't really matter too much because we were in the air and it's essentially recording the last, close to 5 seconds of movement here. So even if we're in the air and we stop and we rewind, we can remember, oh yeah, that's right, we were in the air there. So obviously this is a little dangerous because if I do that, then I'm stuck, but that's part of the mechanic maybe. Oh, can I cheese it? Can I cheese it? No, I can't cheese it. Now in order to keep the player from spamming this, if I put this on remote controllable, you can see if I keep spamming it, that seems like an undesirable effect, so we can go ahead and add a cooldown. So I will get a timer out, and this will act as a cooldown. I'll set this to, I don't know, like 3 seconds or something, and I will make sure that it is full. And so when it is full, we will power this node, which will allow us to press the button. And this signal, meaning when we've let go of the button, that will reset the timer. So we can press it and let go, but now when we spam it, nothing happens. We may want a little visual indicator there, so let's get out a text displayer. So we can have this little bar here that will signal our cooldown. I will make sure that it is left aligned. That way it can only shrink like that from the right. If I get a copy, and so this one will get rid of the fill, right? That'll just be a blank bar. So here's our inner thing. We'll get a keyframe out, touch it. Now I'll get another keyframe out, and I will shrink it all the way down. So the full one will go to the end, like so, and the other one will go here in the middle. And so we can see how this looks. It'll grow like that. Now to get these to show up, we have to make sure that we come in here and just make sure that is blank text, otherwise they won't show up by default. And so we only want these things to show up while this is happening. So I'll get a not gate out. And when this timer isn't finished, that will turn these on. There we go. So now we can run around, and when we decide to press something and then let go, we can see we have a cooldown here, and when I press the button during that cooldown, nothing happens. We can make the block invisible now. So I will just go into the sculpt, make it not visible, and quickly turn preview invisibility off, and bring this cube back into the emitter. So now when we're playing, we don't see the path behind us. It just looks like a dude running around, and if we ever press and hold the button, he goes back where we came from. Okay. Now, one thing to note, the jump animation cancels out the running animation, right? There's the jump animation here. His knees come up pretty high. He still like sort of runs a little bit. So it doesn't look too terrible, but you can see there's no jump animation happening. And so if we currently the running strength is powering the running pose parameters. So if instead we use the movement strength, we'll see now that the character when he jumps still kind of moves his legs and there's less knee rise. And so that can make things look a little smoother in terms of how it looked when you actually did those actions in the first place. If you guys like this, let me know. If you didn't like it, also let me know. Feel free to leave any comments and upvotes, downvotes, whatever. Thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever you call it. And if you'd like to see any other tutorials in the future, you know, let me know. I'd love to be interested in what people want to learn about. I hope you enjoyed. So with that, it's the end of the video. Take care.